Hello and welcome to our video series on managing work-related stress. In this video, I will be focusing on the organisational approach to managing work-related stress. I'll be explaining about the management standards process and the associated 5 steps to risk assessment. There are 3 parts to our video series. Throughout the 3-part series of the management standards video, I'll be discussing what work-related stress is, why organisations should manage it, and then how to manage it. We'll also be looking at the importance of preparing the organisation before you begin the risk assessment process. And I'll go through each of the 5 steps. At this stage, I would also like to recommend that you look at our other videos on the line manager's approach to managing work-related stress and understanding fatigue and burnout. In this video, which is part 1 of the 3-part series, we'll be looking at the business case to managing work-related stress. I'm going to look at the difference between work-related stress and pressure. I'm going to look at the business case. I'm going to look at the introduction to managing the HSE Management Standards, and then I'll be taking you through the preparing the organisation and the importance of preparing the organisation. In part 2 then, I'll be going through steps 1 to 4 of the risk assessment approach, and then in the 3rd video, I'll be looking at step 5 and some resources that are available to assist you in implementing the approach in your organisation. So I'm going to begin by looking at what is work-related stress. We use the definition from the HSE and GB, and they define work-related stress as the adverse reaction that people have to excessive pressures or other types of demand that is placed upon them. Now, there are a few key phrases in this definition, one being the adverse reaction that people or individuals have, and to excessive pressures or other types of demand that is placed upon them. Sometimes stress maybe is an overused word. I think we may be all guilty of saying I've had a stressful day, I feel so stressed out. When it comes to work and work-related stress, the HSE focus on work-related stress and looking at the difference between stress and maybe pressure. Now this is going to a wee bit more detail on this and the human performance curve. So let's have a look at the diagram called the human performance curve here. What it does, it describes how individuals function under differing degrees of pressure. Now, we all have the same stages of the curve, but the factors are the level of exposure and the duration that cause us to move through each of the stage. It varies significantly from person to person, so it's a very individual thing. If you look at the beginning here, where there is no pressure or incentive to fulfill a task, motivation and performance is low. Now, research has found that as pressure increases, so does your performance, until it reaches an optimal level. If the pressure lasts for a significant length of time or it passes the optimum point, then you might notice that performance starts to decrease, and this is where exhaustion, burnout and stress starts to occur. Now, I want to also point out that individuals do have varying tolerance levels and they do react differently to stressors or triggers. Therefore, the point at which pressure develops into stress will be different for every individual. But if pressure continues past that optimal performance point, effort becomes harder and performance is significantly reduced. Continued pressures then often lead to ill health and individuals being unable to function at work, and this causes presenteeism. And presenteeism is when the reduction in productivity occurs because when employees are coming to work but they're functioning at less than full capacity. So let's look and think about the business case of why organisations should be managing work-related stress, and it's really built around 3 key areas. It's built around the financial costs of not managing work-related stress, the moral responsibility on organisations to manage work-related stress, and then the legal duty as well that is upon organisations on why they should be managing work-related stress. So I'm going to start off by considering the legal duty. Now, the first thing to note is that there's no health and safety legislation at present that specifically mentions work-related stress. So the legal framework is really built around 2 pieces of legislation and a piece of best practice guidance. The first piece of legislation is the Health and Safety at Work Northern Ireland Order 1978. And I would like to direct you to the Article 4 of that piece of legislation, where it places a duty of care on employers to say they must take all reasonable precautions to protect the health of their employees. Then this is built upon by a subordinate piece of legislation called the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations Northern Ireland 2000. And Regulation 3 places a duty on employers to risk assess, including risks to mental health. In the past, these duties often focused on physical well-being, but now it is recognised that it applies equally to psychological health and well-being. And finally, in order to help employers more effectively risk assess for work-related stress, the Health and Safety Executive have developed what we call the HSE Management Standards and the Management Standards approach. And it's really a piece of a best practice guidance on carrying out a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. And together, these two pieces of legislation and a piece of best practice guidance make up the legal framework that employers have to operate under regarding work-related stress. Let's look at the moral responsibility. Work-related stress can cause or exacerbate pre-existing medical conditions, and it's also linked to maybe possible causation factor for other health problems, maybe such as the like of heart disease, cancers, etc. The second point I'd like to make with regards to the moral responsibility is that individuals that are suffering from work-related stress, they often adopt maladaptive or negative coping strategies. And this could be anything from maybe dependency on drugs, alcohol. It could be even things like getting addicted to maybe exercise, shopping, those kinds of things. Again, because we mentioned that work-related stress is individual and how we react is differently, this will be different for different people. There's also a responsibility on organisations to contribute to the health and the society that they operate in, and ultimately this is mutually beneficial, as a healthier society will make for a healthier and more successful business environment. And even with regards to the historical context, there's been lots of different organisations out there that have taken the health and well-being of the individuals and their employees into consideration. This all comes under the corporate social responsibility. Let's look at a few statistics. The health and safety, there's 822,000 people suffering from work-related stress, and these are the statistics, work-related stress, and this may be due to stress, anxiety and depression. And these are the statistics, the most recent ones that we've got, and from 2020 to 2021. So 822,000 people suffering from work-related stress. Also look at that, 50% of all work-related ill health cases by type as well were due to work-related stress, anxiety and depression. Some figures as well from 2019-2020, 17.9 million days were also due to work-related stress, anxiety and depression. And I think this point is a very important point for organisations to take into consideration. The average duration per case that someone may be off work if they're suffering from work-related stress is 21.6 working days. Now, if you think about the implications of that might have on your organisation, on your teams, if someone is off for 26.1 working days. And again, 50% of all working days lost due to ill health were also due to work-related stress, anxiety and depression. So I think these statistics speak for themselves and the figures are quite staggering. Staying with the financial cost to organisations, a lot of organisations know there will be a lot of direct costs, and that can be things like sick pay. So if someone is off sick, maybe have to pay them sick pay. There might be lost production costs. You might have to pay overtime, or maybe for agency workers. Maybe if you have to rehabilitate someone back into the workplace, again, there's all costs associated with these. But not only are they the tip of the iceberg. If you think of the indirect costs that organisations might have with regards to someone being off from work-related stress, staff morale might be affected. You might have to take some remedial action after investigation. You might have to move staff into other duties, or maybe have to spend time investigating. You may have to recruit, or there'll be training costs, staff turnover costs. So, and also there could be things like reputational damage to take into consideration. So not only have we direct costs of not managing this, there's also the indirect costs that organisations might have as well. So now that we've discussed the legal requirements, we've looked at the moral responsibility, and we looked at the financial implications placed upon organisations, I'm going to now introduce to you what we call the management standards, the HSE Management Standards, and explain what they are. So what are the management standards? The management standards are a set of conditions that, if they're managed correctly in organisations, they can reflect high levels of health and well-being and organisational performance. Now, the management standards cover the 6 key areas of work design. So if these key areas of work design aren't properly managed, they can be associated with poor health and well-being. They can be associated with lower productivity, and they can be associated with increased sick absence in your organisations. So the 6 key management standards are demands, control, support, relationships, role, and change. So these 6 standards cover the primary sources of stress at work. I'm going to go through each of the standards with you. So when we're thinking about demands, I want you to think about workloads and think about your own workloads and the workloads of your staff members. So your deadlines, work scheduling, but even physical environment also falls under the standard of demands. When you think about control, think about what element of control does a person have in their job. How are they able to make decisions? Have they the authority to make decisions? Have they got that autonomy? With regards to support, we're not only talking about managerial support, but we're talking as well about peer support. So what levels of support are available within your organisation? What levels of practical and emotional support are available? Again, are there systems in place in your organisations to deal with these? When we think about the standard relationships, again, this is about the culture and ethos of the organisations, and it's about promoting that positive working relationship. Are there things within the organisation about dealing with conflict? Are there policies in place dealing with bullying and harassment? When we think about role, again, do they understand their role? Do individuals and your employees understand how their role fits into the bigger picture within the organisation? Is there any ambiguity in a person's role or any conflict? And these are the things that, if they're not managed, they can cause or exacerbate work-related stress. And then the final standard is change. Now, this really looks at about how organisational change, whether it's large or small, is managed within your organisation. How is change communicated throughout the organisation? And it can mean anything from new ways of working, new technology. So it's not about a particular change, it's about how the process of change is managed within your organisation and if your employees are consulted or involved within the change. So those are the 6 key areas of work design that we discussed. Now, where the management standards of process fits into this, so it is an intervention to try and manage work-related stress. And we look at the HSE Management Standards as a primary intervention to managing work-related stress. The risk assessment, it's a tried and tested approach to managing the risk, and it's a step-by-step process which I'll take you through. So the Management Standards is a primary intervention. Also think about in your organisations, do you have things like stress policies in place? Have you got things like that? Because we're focusing really here on the reducing and modifying workplace stress and trying to reduce their negative impact on all individuals within the organisations. So systems and mechanisms to prevent that in the first place are normally based on good management methods. And they can even include things like job redesign, work-life balance, adapting to the work, etc. So those are our primary interventions. Organisations have secondary interventions and they focus on increasing the awareness and the coping skills of the individuals in the organisations. So that could be anything from the like of stress management training, health promotion activities, etc. within your organisations. And again, there should be systems in place to help deal with these things in your organisation. And then we have tertiary organisations, and these are really concerned with the treatment and rehabilitation of distressed individuals. So you may have employee assistance programmes which maybe offer counselling, maybe return to work policies, etc. But what we are encouraging organisations to do is have a blended approach to this in the organisation. So you should have your risk assessment and your policies as part of your primary interventions, but also have a blended approach, have secondary and tertiary interventions in place as well within your organisation. So why should you use the management standards? Well, work-related stress, like all other hazards, is preventable. Now, your organisation do have responsibilities to employees. So I'm going to go through some benefits of using the management standards approach in your organisation. Firstly, the management standards approach deals with work-related stress at that organisational level. We focus on prevention rather than cure. So the risk assessment focuses on prevention and trying to prevent work-related stress occurring in the first place. It is a risk assessment approach. It's 5 steps to risk assessment, and I will be taking you through the approach in the next video. By using the risk assessment approach, you are controlling the risks at source. And if you think of your hierarchy of control, you're trying to control the risk of work-related stress at source by adopting a risk assessment. It promotes active discussion. The management standards approach is an excellent employee engagement tool, and employee engagement is critical to the success of the management standards approach. Consultation with your workforce and their representatives is key to developing effective solutions and for the success of the approach in your organisation. By surveying staff, which I'll go into more detail in the next video, you will be able to benchmark your performance. And because a risk assessment should always be revisited again, you will have the survey results, but you'll be able to go back and benchmark against that the next time you carry out your risk assessment. It is known as a best practice approach. So the management standards approach is a best practice approach. Now, it's not the only way to do it, but it is known from the HSE and GB, it's known as a best practice approach. And it's simple and easy to use. And it is a free tool for all organisations, and we have a lot of resources available on our website. Now, I'm going to talk to you a wee bit about how the HSE and I facilitate this risk assessment process, and before I take you through the 5 steps. The first step to the risk assessment process is to identify your risk factors. Now, HSE have actually done that for you, and they're the 6 standards that we talked about in a previous slide. So they're demands, control, support, relationships, role, and change. Step 2 is deciding who could be harmed and how. This is where we will be gathering some quantitative information and gathering some data using what we call the HSE indicator tool. And it's a 35 multiple choice questionnaire. Step 3 is all about evaluating the risks. And again, this is where we gather our qualitative data, and it is recommended that focus groups are carried out. So you need to talk to your staff and draw on their experiences in relation to the standards. Step 4 is all about recording your findings and developing an action plan. So what you're doing is you're taking the information that you've gathered at step 2 from the survey, and the information you've gathered from your focus groups at step 3, and using any other survey information that you have within your organisation and developing an action plan. And step 5 of the risk assessment process is to monitor and review. So we're looking at continuous improvement here and monitoring for continuous improvement. This would usually be taken on by the steering group, but I'll go into more detail on that in the next video. So there are 5 steps to the risk assessment, but you might notice in the centre of the diagram is preparing the organisation. Before you begin this process, it's important to admit obviously that work-related stress might be an issue within your organisation, but it is very, very important to prepare your organisation if you're going to embark on this process. Organisations often fail to prepare and communicate with employees. Experience we've found is that preparing the organisation in the process helps to aid success. It helps to gain senior management commitment and commitment from all employees. And it also helps with the planning and identifying any potential barriers that you might face. So I'm going to talk to you about preparing the organisation and go through the 4 different points. So before you begin using the approach, it's important you prepare the organisation, and the success of the management standards really relies on senior management commitment and worker involvement throughout the process. Like I had mentioned before, it's an excellent employee engagement tool. So employee engagement is critical to the success of this management standards approach. And consultation with your workforce and their representatives is key to developing effective solutions. Experience, like I said, has found that preparing the organisation aids success of the project, and staff are more likely to take part if they see that maybe senior managers are committed to managing the causes of work-related stress. And it also helps with planning and identifying potential barriers. So before you begin the process, it's very important that you secure commitment. And we may think of the people that we need to secure commitment from. So we need to secure commitment from the like of senior management, trade unions, employee representative groups, line managers, and of course employees and individuals within the organisation. It is very important to appoint a champion. So a champion really drives the project forward, and they're typically a member of staff at senior level who has authority to allocate and manage any agreed resources. So the role of the project champion, it's not always taken on by maybe board level, as recommended maybe by the management standards, but it relies maybe on a maybe member of staff, maybe that has potential project management experience. The champion should be leading from the front with the project and try and gain support for the project. They may have to chair the steering committee. They also may have to do things like represent the project at board level and feedback on how the project is going. They need to make sure that the project is adequately resourced, and that possibly, again, like we said, with someone with project management experience. Now it leads me nicely on to talking to you about the steering group. So a steering group should be set up, and the steering group should consist of some senior level representation. It should have approximately 8 to 10 people, and the management standards is really designed to be that partnership approach, so all employee groups should be involved in the process. And by doing this, you increase the probability that the project will deliver real improvements and lead to that maybe a cultural change within the organisation. Again, experience has shown us that the process has greater chance of success when there is cooperation between groups. So therefore it is advisable that all organisations set up a partnership steering group. The steering group then should be overseeing the project. They should be thinking about what members and what representatives that they have. And one of the things that the steering group do is obviously producing that action plan. That's at stage 4 of the management standards approach. Another important element is the communication strategy. With regards to communication, we need to make sure that communication is ongoing throughout the process. The communication should be top-led, and it should be bottom-fed and middle-spread. We should be ensuring that the relevant parties are involved within the communication process, and we should also communicate to the employees why we're carrying out this risk assessment process. Communication, you might need to communicate with regards to the timeline of the project. So for example, when you're actually going to carry out the survey, the dates you're going to carry out the survey, the dates then you're also going to carry out the focus groups, and when maybe the action plan will be implemented. We should always be encouraging two-way communication as well. And also think about using different means of communication within your organisation. And because organisations all are different, different things will work for different organisations. But think about using different means or different ways of communicating to your staff. Now that brings us to the end of part 1 of the 3-part series on managing work-related stress, the management standards approach. So in this video we discussed work-related stress and pressure. We discussed the business case for managing work-related stress, which were legal, financial and moral reasons why we should manage it. We also had an introduction to the HSE Management Standards themselves, and we went through the importance of preparing the organisation. So please join me in my next video, which is part 2 of our 3-part video series. But if you want to contact us for any more information or anything or any help on anything we've talked about in this video, then you can contact us via our email, which is stress@hseni.gov.uk, or by telephone 0800 0320 121. Thank you for watching.